Morning, everybody. Crappy Mondays. Apparently, it's still the summer holidays, which is perhaps why I feel more exhausted than during term time. Welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox, and today I'm joined by the Mirror's Deputy Political Editor, Lizzy Buchan. Morning, Lizzy.
Morning.
Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast, no doubt from your sun lounger somewhere, will just have to calculate what the long-term impact of everything we're about to discuss might be. So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on a photograph of Alice da Silva Aguirre, age 9, posing next to a Taylor Swift cutout on the day that she and two others were stabbed and killed at a holiday dance workshop in Southport. It was her funeral at the weekend, and if you want to know more about that and how it went, please read today's paper. It's a bit too upsetting, really, for a parent of someone who's about that age to talk about. So inside is, we all saw it happen, but I'm still shocked to say it. One of the consequences of the far-right riots, which were stoked in the wake of those shocking murders. A lady called Maya Amengel-Daiva, I think, is a Pride of Britain winner, and she runs a community food bank. Yet somehow the rioters felt she was responsible for what had happened to Alice, if I've got this right. Lizzy, can you take us through this? Because, I can't even...
Yeah, this is a really awful story. So Maya, I think, has spoken to the police about she runs a food bank in Kent and was which was subject to an attempted arson, and that she said she was attacked by 3 masked men. Now, Maya's from Turkmenistan, but has been living in the UK for 15 years. I think is British citizen. But Turkmenistan is a Muslim country, and she believes that she was targeted for this reason. Obviously, it's just a really awful story, and the kind of thing that, that we've seen on the streets over the last few days, and I think is kind of part of the fallout of obviously the anger and the rioting that sort of sprung up in the wake of the Southport stabbings. There's this sort of some of the things that have been bubbling under the surface, these really, really unpleasant sort of criminal acts being committed. And yeah, I think it's this sort of events like this show that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Now that the immediate the immediate rioting and looting appears, touch wood, to have wound itself down, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on dealing with, racism, bigotry in our society, anti-immigrant sentiment, all of that sort of thing. And that's going to be a huge project for the new government to deal with. Yeah, and it wasn't something that was in the manifesto. It's not in their big list of things to do, but it's in the in tray now, isn't it? There's no way to get around it. And what do you think, everybody? How do you feel about the fact these riots have been over relatively quickly? Okay, normally riots, we've seen them before. 2011, they lasted for a couple of weeks. This has been, a couple of weekends, and it's kind of gone. And I think the way it's been handled has been pretty good. But what do you think? Do you think it's been handled badly? Do you think something different should have been done about it? Get in the comments and let us know. Maya is a businesswoman. She lives in Herne Bay. And she seems to have quite a high profile locally because she runs a food bank and a community cafe. And she obviously is quite vocal, I would have thought. And yes, Turkmenistan, where she's from, is a majority Muslim country, but their version of Islam is Sunni, not Shia. It's heavily influenced by traditional folk practices. So it's not even the kind of Islam that, your fundamentalists would really approve of necessarily.
And the second biggest religion is Russian Orthodox. We don't know which one Maya might be, but looking at her, she's blonde-haired, brown-eyed. Frankly, I don't care what religion she's got, because she seems like a thoroughly decent person who's an absolute adornment to our country. She's won Pride of Britain for her work. She's obviously helping the local community in Herne Bay, which is one of those sort of left behind coastal areas where you don't get an awful lot of funding or jobs going on. So she's obviously needed. And she's obviously doing well compared to the three men who held her down. They called her a dirty immigrant, told her to go back to her Muslim country, probably because they couldn't say Turkmenistan, much less locate it on a map. And they put her in fear of rape, as three masked men would do to any woman on her own. Now, Lizzy, one of the things we learned today was that a total of 927 people so far have been arrested over these riots. Don't think these three have been found yet, hopefully one day. But despite all the howls of protest from the right wing about Keir Starmer suppressing freedom of speech and so on, the courts, the sentencing, the public in general seem to be showing that that's not all on the same page. The public are very pro this crackdown, and from the people we've seen who've been to court, they weren't out there expressing their freedom of speech, were they?
No, I mean, I think the Prime Minister has made it really clear over and over again that this is a law and order issue, that this is the way that the government is choosing to treat it, that these are not people expressing legitimate grievances. These are people who are going out into their own communities, committing criminal damage, assault, attacking police officers who were there. This all sort of came out after the Southport, the terrible knife attacks in Southport, where 3 young girls were killed, and the police had to intervene there, the emergency services had to intervene there, and all these thugs are doing is sort of attacking people who tried to save the lives of innocent girls. And I think the government has been has very much zeroed in on that point. A lot of people are looking at the pictures that they see on the streets and they're saying, this doesn't reflect the Britain that I know. And all you're doing is looting local businesses, causing criminal damage. Like, you've seen, there's quite a lot of mockery of people saying, you think you're some sort of patriot, that you go out on the street to defend us from some phantom enemy, when in fact you're the people who are causing all the damage and causing people to be fearful, attacking police officers. And, so, yeah, I think the public appears to be very much in the space that these are people who are committing crimes, and that's it. It's not a legitimate debate on anything, because as the pictures that you can just see right now, like, I don't know what views those people are expressing that are legitimate.
No, they're chucking, for those who want to know, these are various videos that we're watching now. For those on podcasts, we're watching some videos from the riots last week, which are, in a car park, they're in a street, they're in Middlesbrough, they're in Liverpool, and they're basically just people wrapped in flags, but chucking planks at police officers outside a hotel in Tamworth, chucking a brick in Rotherham, setting bins on fire, basically having a scrap with a bloke behind a riot shield. All of which isn't freedom of speech. And it does seem to be that, when it's these guys that are going to court, people are going to be right bang alongside Keir Starmer and cracking down on that. But the right is very much trying to sort of reverse engineer some of this, isn't it? As a form of cracking down on dissent, suppressing disagreement. And they're somehow they've tried to blame Keir Starmer for the immigration problems, which seems he's been in power 4 weeks is quite a reach. But then when that hasn't worked, they've tried to blame him for being too tough on these people, because some of the sentences are really strong. I mean, the lady that everyone kind of remembers seeing a video of, who pushed a wheelie bin on fire at police officers and then fell down flat on her face. She wasn't a rioter per se. She wasn't, a member of the far right. She wasn't supporting those views, but she'd been smoking weed all day, and then just got dragged into it when she went outside, according to the court, and then sort of ended up flat on her face, having done something silly, and very harsh sentences perhaps on some people who got innocently dragged in. Does seem a bit hard to some people.
But then you could argue that pushing a flaming bin at somebody has the potential to to injure somebody quite seriously. So I suppose, I think you are right that there's certainly an element of what was going on, school holidays, the weather was really hot. There were loads of kids just hanging around. There are lots of people who sort of just came out to see what was going on, got caught up in the kind of, but ultimately, I think, if you're putting people's lives at risk, it doesn't really matter whether, you originally intended to go and cause disorder. If you are there and you've been caught up in it, then everyone's making choices, aren't they? Exactly. And I suppose, the government decided that they had to. This is a sort of quite, Keir Starmer was Britain's top prosecutor during the 2011 riots. And so this was, he's using the same kind of strategies that he used then, that this very tough crackdown, this rushing, getting everything through the courts really quickly, which, the government seems to think has acted as a deterrent. I think it's probably part of a complicated picture, isn't it? But yeah, the sentences are harsh. They really are.
They seem to have worked on the people who would drift into it sort of by accident, as it were. Now, Steve says, the right says these people have legitimate concerns which should be addressed. It's absurd. Nigel Farage was out on the airwaves at the weekends talking about how, Keir Starmer took the knee for Black Lives Matter, but yet when it came to white working class people protesting, he was sending them all to jail. Not quite the same thing. Some of the that we saw, some of the disturbances on the street from BLM did lead to jail, as far as I can recall, and did lead to problems, but it wasn't quite on the same scale as this. Anyway, Rob says, divide and conquer, reform's #1 policy. We'll get on to reform in a little bit, but first off, the bottom of that page about the riots, I just want to say, Lizzy, the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, has been out there saying that the impact of these riots are going to be felt for some time because they've bunged up the justice system. They've put more people in jail just when she was trying to sort of ease up some space pressures. Police and so on have had more to do, just at a time when they're really in need of some reforms, frankly. And this is the same Justice Secretary who said she was going to have to let people out early because of the overcrowding. Now there's more people in prison. How long before sort of the far right really has led to the release of some people that these so-called patriots, we really would rather was not on the streets? It's going to make that far more worse, isn't it?
I think that the situation in prisons is pretty dire. One of the first things that the government did after the election was announce that they were going to have to make changes to early release schemes so that some people will be allowed out of jail after serving only 40% of their sentences. Obviously, there are exceptions to this. I think it's all any sort of sexual assaults, domestic violence, serious assault with a sentence of more than 4 years, I believe. So, there are very, more extreme sentences that this would not apply to. But the prisons are full. There's very few cells left. There have been repeated warnings in recent times about the fact that, prisons are really struggling to cope with the space. Our prison estate is ancient. There's loads of Victorian prisons that just are not fit for purpose. This obviously comes at a really difficult time because the government needs to look tough and says that, needs to say that we're sending people to prison for a long time. But they're going to be in a position where some people do have to be released. And it's not entirely clear whether the rioters could be released early or not. I think it was the business secretary. The business secretary yesterday said, my understanding is that rioters won't have their sentences shortened, but that's quite a sort of slightly mealy-mouthed response, and people have interpreted that in different ways. So we're still kind of trying to get to the bottom of that. The Justice Secretary has sort of suggested that won't happen. But, if you're looking at people who are serving, some of these sentences might not be as long for some of the offences, and so would probably be prime candidates for, early release.
Say 3 years for, picking up something out of a broken shop window, as opposed to breaking the shop window or chucking a plank at a police officer or something. You're going to be one of the non-violent opportunist people that they might say, well, it's going to be a bit sticky, that one, as far as new government's concerned. Now, Call-in 6 says those people do have legitimate concerns, mainly poverty. I don't know what your real name is, Call-in 6, but my gran and granddad and my nana and gramps were all very poor their entire lives. And do you know what? They never once put a wheelie on fire and chucked it at the police officers. They never once rioted and never once chucked a plank at anybody. They just went about their business and, moaned and complained and voted and tried to get change that way. Poverty can be a causative factor in some of this stuff, but it's not an excuse. Now, moving on to the main story of the day, and we had a viewer there who's just talking about Reform's main policy is to divide and conquer. Well, this is something that might divide some of their supporters. There will have been lawyers all over this story. Okay, so we're going to be as careful as we can about how we do it. Now, the Mirror, in cooperation with the Good Law Project, has been investigating Reform UK's new MP for Boston and Skegness, Richard Tice. He is a millionaire businessman who was formerly leader of the Reform Party until he was forced to stand aside by that business's majority shareholder, Nigel Farage. Now, Reform has been funded throughout its existence by fairly large donations by Mr. Tice over several years. Today's investigation is into the source and location of some of his personal wealth. Now, Lizzy, can you take us through this? Everything he's been accused of is perfectly legal, of course. It's not a crime. But what are the allegations?
Yeah, so there's no suggestion that Mr. Tice has broken the law. What we're looking at here is sort of allegations of tax avoidance, which is legal and is where, people move their money around to sort of reduce the amount of tax they pay, but within the law. So Richard Tice, who is a very wealthy businessman, has admitted that he set up a family trust in Jersey in the Channel Islands, which is a tax haven, back when he was working in his 20s in Paris, I believe. And so he kept this trust, which is what we call offshore. So he wouldn't have been paying UK related tax on most of it. So he has said that he set it up to avoid being double taxed on international investments. So that can happen where, you pay tax in different countries as well as in the UK on certain things. But he only moved it back from Jersey, I believe, 5 years ago. So he then moved it back into the UK, pays UK tax on it. So there's no suggestion he's broken the law, but the Good Law Project makes the point, and there are questions to answer about the fact that, if you're Reform say they're very patriotic, they obviously make a big thing of, we love Britain, all of that. And so if you love Britain, it's, paying taxes in this country allows you to fund our armed forces, the police, public services in this country. So, Joe Morm of the Good Law Project in the story says, if you want a decent police force, if you want veterans to be looked after, which are things that Reform has talked about in the past, you would put your millions in the UK and pay tax on it in the UK rather than in a tax haven. So obviously Mr. Tice has moved his money back now, but there are questions about there are some questions in the story about kind of why he did it in the first place. Yeah,
and I suspect that some of these questions are going to be things that actually dog the Reform and its MPs over the course of this Parliament. So this is why it's sort of the main story of the day for me, I think, because it's something which we're going to hear about again and again and again. Now, it was in 2019, apparently, that he moved this money from offshore to onshore. Now, what do you think about that, everybody? Are you okay with politicians? Are people just going to be politicians having had this in their past at some point? Obviously, it's not something that most people are able to do. But when we asked him why he did this in 2019, he refused to answer the question. However, in 2019, he stood as the Brexit Party candidate in the general election that year. He came third, so he didn't win. But it seems that was December 2019, it's quite likely that he moved the money before he stood in the election. Now, it seems also quite likely that he took that decision so that if he should win, he wouldn't have any embarrassing questions to answer about the location of his wealth. Now, Lizzy, when MPs get elected, they have to sign a register of interest. They have to declare their finances in some way, outside sources of income and so on. Would offshore funds like that need to be declared? Would it make any difference whatsoever if he had to do that?
Yeah, so this is one of the interesting things about kind of reform legitimising themselves in the sense that they now have representation, proper representation in Parliament. So yeah, MPs' finances are subject to scrutiny, and they're often required to declare if there's a conflict of interest in anything they're doing. But on the register of interest, you have to put down kind of how much you're earning from various things. It can be TV appearances, it can be your salary beyond any pay beyond like your MP salary, all of that sort of thing. So we often will have a comb through it just to see kind of what MPs are up to. So sometimes you'll see that MPs are writing books, they're doing speeches. Some people make a lot of money doing after dinner speeches. So Richard Tice would have had to put some of the details of these things in his register of interest. And I think this is something that Reform are going to find a bit more challenging going forward, because they are going to have to declare and answer questions about quite a lot of these things, because you also have to put in who you get donations from, whether it's like private members of the public, trade unions, businesses, all of that sort of thing. And this is all publicly available. So, for a lot of MPs, it's not very complicated. They have a fairly sort of straightforward system, but for some people, it really is quite complicated. And, someone like Boris Johnson, we used to have quite a lot of work looking at his register of interest, because it was always quite chaotic. And
you surprised me.
Yeah. There would be sort of donations, there'd be gifts of money that weren't always entirely clear, and it was all legal, but there was periods of time where he got certain things paid for by certain donors and then couldn't remember who had paid for it or why, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think Richard Tice he's a smart man. He knows that he's going to be under scrutiny over this sort of thing, which is why I think he's answered the Mirror's questions in this story quite clearly. So I suspect, if he was running to be an MP in 2019, this would have formed part of his thinking at the time.
Yeah. Well, when you're a very wealthy person, financial planning is something that occupies, I thought, most of your time. And obviously, if you know that you're going to have to start having your finances under some kind of scrutiny, then you might start tidying them up a little bit, and in whatever way would be more conducive to what it is you're trying to do next. Now, Rob says, we tried telling you Reform is just a distraction from the real enemy, the billionaire class. I suppose, to try and say something here from Richard Tice's point of view, it was at least a British tax haven. He wasn't putting it in somewhere in South America. He wasn't stashing it in Panama. He wasn't hiding it in Monaco. He was stashing it in Jersey, which is our own tax haven. But Wes says it's called capitalism, bub. Yes, that is how it works, and that's the way our tax system is set up in this country, to give very rich people the option to put some of their stuff in Jersey. But Wes, if you or I wanted to go to Jersey, I'd like to shelter my salary, please, over there. You'd find it really difficult. In fact, the prices charged to do that for you would be so punitive that most normal people are never ever going to do it. It's only when you have millions that it actually becomes profitable to do that. I don't know who this person is, because their name is astonishing. M's and J's posed as new C's in Portugal. I don't think that's their real name. So it's not capitalism, it's globalism and cronyism. Now, we don't know where the money Mr. Tice used for the Brexit Party's success of the Reform UK actually came from. All we can say is that his personal wealth was protected in part from some taxation, which the rest of us would have to pay, and we wouldn't be able to shelter in this way. And that his personal wealth is also the same source where he has been backing Reform and funding its operations for quite a long time. Steve says, Farage, Tice and Lowe are hardly working class heroes. No, they're not, are they? But yet they have been elected by people who are very working class and in very working class seaside towns. Now, I can't remember, Lizzy, if the Reform pledge to voters, they didn't bother with the manifesto, did they? They had this contract, whether it mentions closing tax havens. But do you think perhaps that getting elected to Parliament might be the worst thing that ever happened to this group of people, because there's so much more scrutiny, so many more rules, and it's so much easier to chuck rocks from the sidelines. But actually being in Parliament is, are they going to be surprised, do you think?
I think it's going to be interesting. As far as I recall, the contract to voters doesn't have anything about tax havens, but also there were lots of things that weren't covered in it. So I think for reform, it is definitely going to be different, because they have cast themselves as sort of insurgents, that they're people on the outskirts, outside of the elite, outside of Westminster, like setting aside the fact that both Nigel Farage has been involved in politics for many years, and him and Richard Tice are both sort of former bankers and that sort of thing. So they're not, these sort of, like the commentator said, working class heroes. But they have found a way to talk to people and to find, to zero in on people's concerns about a number of issues. Being in Parliament does make that slightly more difficult, I think, because the scrutiny is so much higher. Obviously, Nigel Farage has always had quite a lot of scrutiny, but I think you've seen during the riots, there was quite a lot of criticism from MPs of the way that he'd been speaking. He did several videos talking about the riots. He kept sort of hinting that, at the start, he sort of hinted that there might have been something about the Southport stabbing that people weren't being told, which is sort of, he presented no evidence for this, and also is the sort of flag, a red flag thing that is said by sort of conspiracy theorists and that sort of thing. He also repeated a number of things that didn't appear to be true. So I think he is being held to a higher bar now, and I think they may find that quite challenging, because also the other thing is the US election. Nigel Farage is likes to think he's very friendly with Donald Trump and wants to sort of involve himself in that, but he has constituents now. So, there is going to be quite a lot of criticism of him from his constituents. Journalists will definitely write about it if he spends long periods of time in the US, because he's supposed to be representing the good people of Clacton. So I think they will find that there are higher bars that they have to meet, and it depends whether they find that they are able to do the things they want to do in Parliament, or whether they're better off outside of it.
Yeah, exactly. There's already been a few constituents, I think, in Clacton saying, I can't even get hold of Nigel Farage. I can't get out of his office. I can't make a complaint to my MP in some way. Rob says most people have more in common with migrants than with Farage because of the poverty. It is very much the case, isn't it, Lizzie, that the way Farage and Tice have operated in various political sort of guises has been to say that someone is trying to attack them because they're trying to speak for the little man. You can't really do the same thing with the tax man. I think that's going to cause some differences and difficulties, I think, with their public messaging. The one big question I've got before we move on to the good news is that Reform is a business. It's not a party. They don't have a membership. They don't have voting rights. There's no internal democracy. Nigel Farage is the majority shareholder of a business, basically. He can do whatever he pleases with it. But, he was on the airwaves over the weekend having a go at Keir Starmer over free speech. He's previously said this stuff about the riots, or supposedly has some incitement power of the riots in Southport. But Keir Starmer was elected, twice. He was elected by his party and elected by his constituents and by the country. Nigel doesn't give any of his supporters the same right to select their leader, if you like. How long do you think that arrangement of a business, not a party, can sort of stand in Parliament? Because there aren't any rules against it. But do you think he's going to have to convert it at some point?
I suspect so, but there aren't any rules against it. I mean, I think with Reform, they're a very new party. So obviously they were the Brexit party originally. Now they've moved over. And for a while, when Richard Tice was leader and Nigel Farage was doing other things, they were quite a small organisation in some ways. And you saw that during the election they had endless issues with the vetting of their candidates, because they claimed that they'd given money to some vetting company who hadn't done the job properly. And so there were lots of issues around people's historic social media posts and all sorts of things. So, yeah, I think that they are going to kind of come up against some of those issues. The only thing with reform that is, I always wonder, is it really is the Nigel Farage vehicle. Like, and now they have other MPs. It's going to be interesting to see how much those people begin to play a role, or whether it continues to always be the Nigel Farage show. Because if you suddenly have some of the other MPs, strong characters like Richard Tice, Lee Anderson, former Conservative, who will have views on how they want to do things, and it might not always be rosy. Political parties tend to not always agree on everything, regardless of their politics. So I think, we'll see. But I mean, it might be that the members feel that they're being shortchanged and they want a bit more for their money. They want to have more of a say.
Yeah, but it's a bit difficult.
We'll have to wait and see.
If you don't have voting rights, isn't it? And the majority shareholder says, I'm just the boss and that's that. Bit more difficult perhaps to accuse other people of being dictators though. Right, thank you very much for that, Lizzy. We have managed to find some good news in the world for you. It's a fascinating story, this. Here it is. Now, lots of very keen fishermen dream of landing that extra special catch, the beastie that no one else can find. And Richard West from Plymouth has finally managed something that has never been done before. He has caught a tiny Lego shark lost overboard in 1997 in what was called the Great Lego Spill of 1997. When a freak wave tilted a container vessel and 62 containers were lost to the waves, containing millions and millions of Lego pieces. Now, this is the first shark ever recorded as coming from that spill. It's probably worth more per gram than like a bluefin tuna or something. Lizzy, is this proof that if people who know what they're doing do something very, very carefully and very, very well, whatever is polluting the place can be located, plucked out, dealt with, solved?
I love this story. I had never heard of the Great Lego Spill of 1997 until now. It's absolutely amazing that there's this project of Lego Lost at Sea who are sort of trying to find all these bits of Lego. It's absolutely mad that this man has found a shark that they haven't, the first of its kind from 27 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, I'm impressed that he even knew what he was looking for and didn't think it was just some sort of bit of rubbish or whatever.
Yeah, and he found this little tiny thing in his net and he decided to contact, there's an association for lost Lego, and managed to go, oh yes, that's the Great Lego. Oh my gosh, he's found the shark. And they were ever so excited. And it's wonderful. Years ago, I did stories about, there was a container ship of rubber ducks that got lost overboard in 19 dot. And they have been found, they're still being found today, washing up everywhere, because I think they got lost in the Pacific. They found their way through the ice. The one that I wrote about, it found its way through the ice over the top of Canada, into the Atlantic, round Greenland, and then washed up somewhere like in Cornwall. It was astonishing, the actual path that these things had taken, because of the way that the Earth's currents and the oceans and everything work. It's fantastic. I think I have to go and Google the Great Lego Spill of 1997 now and learn more about it, because it is fascinating. Thank you, Lizzy, for taking us through all this. Best wishes to Maya and to Alice's family. And thank you, everyone, for taking part. We will see you all again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. And apparently the summer holidays are going to last another 74 million years, so we'll still be here. We'll see you then. Till then, everyone, take care. Tatty bye.